In the gilded conference rooms of Moscow's financial district, a seemingly modest translator was about to face her greatest deception. What started as a routine business meeting took a shocking turn when she came face to face with the man who would change everything. Elena Castellanos wasn't your typical freelance interpreter. For 7 years, she had spent her life building America's third-largest mining empire, known for her ruthless business acumen and inability to trust anyone's motives. When she encountered Dmitri Volkov, dismissing her as just another gold digger in Russian, not knowing she understood every word, she had no idea she was walking into the most dangerous game of her life. Elena's decision to maintain her cover would lead to a web of corporate espionage, family secrets, and a love that threatened to destroy everything she'd built. What began as a calculated business infiltration would become a battle between her heart and her empire. The Moscow mining industry would never be the same after the woman they underestimated revealed she didn't just want their gold. She owned the mines that produced it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The customs officer at Domodedovo Airport studied Elena's passport with the kind of methodical attention that made her palms sweat despite the Moscow winter. Elena Martinez, freelance translator, the document declared. Not Elena Castellanos, heir to the third-largest gold mining operation in North America. Not the woman whose signature could move mountains, literally in some cases. Business or pleasure? The officer asked in accented English, his eyes flickering between her face and the photo. Business, Elena replied in perfect Russian, watching his eyebrows rise slightly. Translation work for American companies exploring opportunities here. The truth was more complicated. Elena Castellanos owned those American companies, or at least her family's empire did. But Elena Martinez was just a woman with a modest bank account, rented apartment records in Denver, and references from translation agencies that existed only on paper and in carefully maintained websites. The stamp came down with finality. Welcome to Russia. Elena shouldered her single carry-on bag, another calculated detail. Wealthy heiresses traveled with Louis Vuitton sets and personal assistants. Freelance translators made do with practical luggage and empty stomachs. She'd eaten nothing but airline peanuts for 8 hours, and the gnawing hunger felt almost authentic. The arrivals hall buzzed with controlled chaos, families reunited with tears and shouting. Business travelers strode past with the universal expression of jet-lagged determination. Elena scanned the crowd until she spotted her name on a small placard, held by a woman who looked like she could kill someone with a rolled-up newspaper. Katya Petrov approached with the measured gait of someone who'd learned to read people for a living. 40s, Elena guessed. Sharp suit, practical shoes, eyes that missed nothing. Her handshake was firm without being a test of strength. Ms. Martinez, Katya said in English, then switched smoothly to Russian. I hope your flight was comfortable. My car is this way. As they walked, Elena caught Katya's subtle assessment. The way her guide noted Elena's designer coat, bought secondhand and carefully aged. Her confident stride, adjusted to seem professional rather than commanding. Even the slight tension in her shoulders, genuine from carrying the weight of deception. The Moscow skyline revealed itself in fragments through the car window as they drove. Glass towers pierced the sky like crystal needles, while older buildings crouched between them, with Soviet-era stoicism. Elena had studied the city through satellite images and street views, but experiencing the scale, the raw energy of 8 million people living their daily lives, was different. First time in Moscow? Katya asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Yes. I've worked in Europe before, but never this far east. Elena let her voice carry appropriate nervousness. Your English is excellent, by the way. University training, plus some additional education. Katya's smile held secrets. You speak Russian quite well for someone who learned it in college. The comment was casual, but Elena heard the probe underneath. I had excellent professors, and I practice with Russian films. Much more interesting than textbooks. Indeed. What's your favorite? Elena's mind raced. She'd prepared for this, had spent weeks memorizing details about Russian cinema, culture, literature. But Katya's question felt less like small talk and more like verification. The cranes are flying, Elena replied. The cinematography in the birch forest scene is extraordinary. Katya nodded approvingly. A classic choice. Most Americans prefer the action films. The hotel was exactly what Elena had requested through her carefully constructed paper trail. Clean, modest, forgettable. The kind of place where a freelance translator would stay to stretch her budget. Elena checked in under her false identity while Katya waited, noting how the desk clerk barely looked up from his computer. I'll collect you tomorrow morning, Katya said as they rode the elevator to Elena's floor. The Mining Federation offices open at 9. Your appointment is at 10. Alone in her room, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe. The walls were thin enough that she could hear conversations in neighboring rooms. The plumbing groaned with Soviet-era complaints, and the heating system seemed locked in permanent battle with the Moscow winter. Perfect. No one would expect Elena Castellanos to tolerate such accommodations. She opened her laptop and initiated an encrypted video call. Victor's face appeared on screen, his expression tight with worry. Elena, thank God. How did it go? Smoothly, she replied, keeping her voice low. I'm in character. The guide is sharp. Former intelligence, I think. She's already testing me. Victor ran a hand through his prematurely gray hair. I still think this is insane. We could have sent anyone to evaluate the Russian mining sector. Hell, we could have hired a legitimate consulting firm. And they would have gotten the standard presentation. Polished numbers, carefully managed tours, sanitized reports. Elena pulled up files on her laptop. Detailed intelligence about Russian mining operations that had cost her company significant resources to obtain. I need to see what's really happening here. Personal relationships, Victor. That's how real business gets done in Russia. Personal relationships built on lies. The accusations stung because it was true. Elena had spent her adult life learning to navigate a world where her wealth made genuine connections nearly impossible. Men wanted her money. Women saw her as competition. Business partners calculated her worth before they learned her name. This is the only way to know for certain, she said. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'll evaluate the companies worth acquiring, identify potential partners, and come home with real intelligence instead of corporate propaganda. Victor's expression softened. I just worry about you. After everything with James, after Richard before him, you don't trust easily, and this mission requires you to trust people while lying to them. Elena closed her eyes. James Mitchell had been the perfect boyfriend on paper. Harvard Law, impeccable connections, shared interests in art and travel. It had taken her 8 months to realize he was more interested in Castellanos mining than Elena Castellanos. Richard had been worse. A charming rancher who'd proposed after 6 months, then casually mentioned needing investors for his struggling cattle operation. I can handle it, she said. I've been practicing being Elena Martinez for months. She's broke, ambitious, and completely forgettable. You could never be forgettable. The compliment landed wrong, highlighting exactly what Elena was trying to escape. She was memorable because of her wealth, her family name, her position. Elena Martinez would earn attention through her own merits or not at all. After ending the call, Elena spent an hour reviewing her research. Russian mining companies, government regulations, key players in the industry. She memorized names, financial figures, corporate relationships. Knowledge was armor, and she'd need every advantage. The next morning arrived gray and bitter. Moscow winter asserting its authority over the city. Elena dressed carefully. Professional but not expensive. Confident but not commanding. Elena Martinez would be eager to impress without seeming desperate. Katya arrived precisely on time, studying Elena's appearance with professional assessment. You look ready for business. The Russian Mining Federation building rose like a concrete monument to bureaucratic efficiency. Inside, Elena navigated registration, security checks, and the peculiar dance of Russian officialdom. Her appointment was with Deputy Director Volkonsky, a man whose enthusiasm for foreign investment was matched only by his love of lengthy presentations. For 2 hours, Elena endured charts, graphs, and statistics, delivered in the kind of bureaucratic Russian that could make poetry sound like tax code. She took notes, asked appropriate questions, and played the role of eager translator gathering information for mysterious American clients. It was during the coffee break that she first saw him. Dmitri Volkov stood near the refreshment table, clearly uncomfortable in his ill-fitting suit. He held his coffee cup like it might explode, and his eyes constantly scanned the room with the wariness of someone who didn't belong but couldn't afford to leave. Elena approached with Elena Martinez's careful confidence. "Excuse me, are you with one of the mining companies?" He turned, and she caught the full impact of his presence. Dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw, strong hands that spoke of physical work rather than desk jobs, and an expression that suggested he'd been disappointed by people before and expected to be again. "Volkov Mining Equipment," he said in English, though his accent made the words sound like he was testing them. "You are American?" "Yes, Elena Martinez. I'm a translator, working with some companies interested in Russian mining opportunities." She extended her hand, noting how his grip was firm but brief. "Dmitri Volkov." His smile was polite but distant. "You translate for mining companies? That is, unusual specialty." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I find the technical aspects fascinating. There's something honest about mining. You either find what you're looking for or you don't. Elena let genuine enthusiasm creep into her voice. No corporate double talk. No marketing spin. Just rock and dirt and the truth underneath. For the first time, Dmitri's expression showed genuine interest. "You understand mining?" "Some. I grew up in Colorado, so I learned about the industry early." All true, though she omitted that she'd learned it as the granddaughter of a mining pioneer, not as a curious observer. "Colorado has good mining heritage," Dmitri said. "My father worked in mines before he started our company. He always said American miners were, how do you say, tough. They had to be. The mountains don't give up their secrets easily." Dmitri studied her with new attention. "Most translators I meet, they know languages but not business. You seem different." Before Elena could respond, a man in an expensive suit approached their small group. His smile was practiced, his handshake calculated, and his eyes immediately assessed Elena's potential value. "Dmitri, my friend!" The newcomer clapped Dmitri on the shoulder with false familiarity. "I see you've met the lovely American translator. I am Alexei Morozov." Elena recognized the name from her research. Former government minister turned private consultant, with connections throughout Russian industry and rumors of corruption following him like smoke. "Mr. Morozov," she replied neutrally. "Please, call me Alexei. Any friend of Dmitri's is welcome in Moscow." His attention lingered on her longer than necessary. "You must let me show you the real Moscow while you're here. The city has many hidden treasures." "I'm sure it does," Elena replied, maintaining professional distance while noting the flash of irritation that crossed Dmitri's face. "Alexei has been very helpful to many foreign companies," Dmitri said, though his tone suggested this help came with strings attached. "I merely facilitate connections," Morozov replied smoothly. "Russia can be difficult to navigate for outsiders. The right introductions make all the difference." Elena sensed undercurrents she didn't fully understand. Dmitri's discomfort was obvious, but whether it stemmed from financial pressure, personal dislike, or something else entirely remained unclear. "Well," she said carefully, "I appreciate any insights about Russian business culture. This is all quite new to me." Morozov's smile widened. "Of course. Perhaps we could discuss this over dinner? I know a wonderful restaurant." "Actually," Dmitri interrupted, "I was hoping Ms. Martinez might visit our facility. To see real Russian mining equipment, not just government presentations." The invitation surprised them both. Elena because it was unexpected. Dmitri because he seemed to have made the offer without conscious thought. "I would love that," Elena replied, meaning it more than she should have. Morozov's expression flickered with something that might have been annoyance. How wonderful! A true cultural exchange. He handed Elena his business card. When you're ready for more sophisticated Moscow experiences, please call. As Morozov moved away to work the room, Dmitri turned back to Elena with an expression she couldn't quite read. I should warn you, he said quietly. My company is not impressive, like the ones you probably usually work with. We make equipment, we repair machines, nothing glamorous. Honest work rarely is glamorous, Elena replied, but it's usually more interesting than the alternatives. Something in her tone must have resonated, because Dmitri's guarded expression softened slightly. Tomorrow afternoon, if you have time, I can show you how Russian mining really works. Elena nodded, already calculating how this opportunity would advance her mission while trying to ignore the flutter of genuine anticipation she felt. As she watched Dmitri navigate the remaining reception with obvious discomfort, Elena realized her careful plans were already becoming complicated. She'd come to Moscow to evaluate Russian mining companies with cold business logic. She hadn't expected to meet someone who made her want to drop the pretense and simply be herself. But Elena Martinez couldn't afford such luxuries, and Elena Castellanos had too much to lose. The reception wound down with the ritual exchange of business cards and promises to stay in touch. Elena collected contacts, answered questions about her fictional translation services, and played her role with practiced skill. But her attention kept returning to Dmitri, noting how he seemed to fade into the background whenever possible, how his suit looked borrowed, how his conversations focused on technical details rather than profit margins. Tomorrow, she would see his company, evaluate its potential for acquisition, and take another step toward completing her mission. Tonight, she would return to her modest hotel room and file her first report on Russian mining opportunities. What she wouldn't do, what she couldn't afford to do, was acknowledge that for the first time in months, she was looking forward to tomorrow for reasons that had nothing to do with business. The Moscow evening swallowed her taxi as it carried her away from the reception, and Elena stared out at the city lights while wrestling with the uncomfortable realization that deception, no matter how necessary, was already exacting its price. The taxi pulled away from Elena's hotel as Moscow's morning traffic began its daily symphony of horns and exhaust. She clutched her translator's portfolio, carefully assembled with generic business cards and sample documents that would pass casual inspection, while reviewing her mental notes about the mining industry conference ahead. The Radisson Slavyanskaya buzzed with the controlled energy of international business. Elena checked in at the registration desk, accepting her conference badge and folder of materials while scanning the crowd for familiar faces. She spotted Dmitri near the coffee station, looking even more uncomfortable in daylight than he had at yesterday's reception. Elena Martinez, freelance translator, she announced to the conference coordinator, a harried woman juggling multiple clipboards. I'm here to provide translation services for the American delegation. Ah yes, conference room B. The American investors arrived an hour ago. The coordinator thrust a schedule into Elena's hands. Technical presentations begin at 10. Elena found her assigned table in the translators section, noting the perfect vantage point to observe both the presentations and the audience reactions. As American investors filed in, men in expensive suits discussing profit margins and market penetration, Elena prepared to play her role while secretly evaluating their Russian counterparts. The morning's presentations followed predictable patterns. Russian companies showcased their capabilities through PowerPoint slides heavy on impressive numbers and light on practical details. Elena translated dutifully, her trained ear catching nuances that the Americans missed, the hesitation when discussing government regulations, the careful phrasing around environmental concerns, the subtle desperation underlying confident projections. During the coffee break, she overheard a conversation that made her blood freeze. The translator seems to know more about mining than most of these company representatives, one of the American investors commented to his colleague. She's been asking surprisingly technical questions. Elena's pulse quickened. She'd been too engaged, too knowledgeable. Elena Martinez should be focused on language, not geological formations and extraction methodologies. Maybe she's worked mining contracts before, the other investor replied. Still, pretty impressive for a freelancer. Before Elena could retreat, Dmitri appeared beside her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You looked like you needed this," he said, offering her one of the cups. "These conferences are exhausting." "Thank you." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, using the moment to study his face. Up close, she could see the fatigue around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried tension like a physical weight. "Your presentation was interesting," she said carefully. "Volkov mining equipment has an impressive history." Dmitri's expression darkened. "History doesn't pay bills or satisfy investors who want guaranteed returns." The bitterness in his voice caught Elena off guard. She'd expected pride, perhaps defensiveness about his family business. Instead, she heard the frustration of a man fighting battles he couldn't win. "The Americans seemed engaged," she offered. "Americans always seem engaged when they smell opportunity." Dmitri's tone sharpened. "They ask about profit margins, market share, acquisition potential. They never ask about the people who built these companies or what happens to employees after the deals are signed." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. His words struck too close to home. She was exactly the kind of American investor he was describing, hidden behind a translator's facade. "Maybe some Americans are different," she said quietly. Dmitri studied her with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Perhaps, but in my experience, Americans, especially American women in business settings, are usually here for one reason. Which is to find wealthy Russian men. Gold diggers, we call them in English, yes?" His smile was sardonic. "They come with translators, or consultants, or cultural exchange programs. Always very interested in mining, in oil, in anything that produces money." The accusation hit Elena like a physical blow. She stood there, coffee growing cold in her hands, while the man she'd been secretly evaluating dismissed her as a fortune hunter. The irony was so sharp it took her breath away. She owned gold mines, and he was calling her a gold digger. "That's quite an assumption," she managed to say, her voice carefully controlled. "Is it wrong?" Dmitri's gaze intensified. "You show up at mining conferences, demonstrate unusual knowledge of technical processes, ask detailed questions about company finances. Either you're exceptionally dedicated to translation work, or you're researching investment opportunities for someone with deep pockets." Elena's mind raced. She could deflect with humor, retreat into professional distance, or she could fight back. Elena Martinez might be modest and forgettable, but she didn't have to be a pushover. "You're absolutely right," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "I am researching investment opportunities. For my clients. That's what good translators do. We provide context, not just words. If you find my competence threatening, perhaps the problem isn't with my motivations." Dmitri blinked, clearly not expecting her directness. "I didn't mean, yes, you did." Elena's voice carried quiet steel. "You assumed I was incompetent or opportunistic because I'm an American woman asking intelligent questions. The fact that I might actually understand mining operations apparently never occurred to you." For a moment, they stared at each other across the cultural and personal divide Elena's deception had created. She could see him reassessing, noting the confidence in her posture, the knowledge in her questions, the way she refused to be dismissed. "You're not what I expected," he admitted finally. "Neither are you." Elena turned away before he could respond, her heart pounding with anger and something else, something that felt dangerously like attraction to his reluctant honesty. The afternoon session passed in tense awareness of Dmitri's presence across the room. Elena translated mechanically while wrestling with the complexity of their interaction. He'd insulted her, yes, but he'd also revealed his own vulnerabilities, his suspicion of foreigners, his financial pressures, his fierce protectiveness of his family's legacy. As the conference concluded, Elena gathered her materials with the efficiency of someone eager to escape. But Dmitri intercepted her near the exit. "My invitation still stands," he said without preamble, "to visit our facility. If you're genuinely interested in understanding Russian mining operations, not just evaluating their profit potential." Elena looked up at him, this proud, difficult man who'd somehow managed to intrigue and infuriate her simultaneously. "Tomorrow afternoon," she replied. "And Mr. Volkov? I'm exactly as genuine as you are." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him to puzzle over her meaning, while she struggled with the growing realization that her carefully planned mission was becoming far more complicated than she'd anticipated. The woman he'd called a gold digger owned more gold than he could imagine. The question was whether she'd ever be able to tell him the truth. Elena's taxi wound through Moscow's industrial district, past Soviet-era factories that squatted like concrete monuments to a different era. The afternoon sun struggled through gray clouds, casting everything in muted tones that matched her conflicted mood about this visit to Dmitri's company. Volkov Mining Equipment occupied a modest complex of buildings that had clearly seen better decades. The main office building wore a fresh coat of paint that couldn't quite hide the cracks underneath, while the workshop beyond echoed with the sounds of metal on metal, the honest noise of actual work being done. Dmitri met her at the reception desk, his discomfort in yesterday's borrowed suit replaced by the easy confidence of a man on his own territory. In work clothes, he looked younger, more approachable, though his eyes still held that guarded quality she was beginning to recognize as habitual wariness. "Ms. Martinez," he said with formal politeness. "Welcome to our operation." The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, smiled warmly at Elena. "Another American visitor? How wonderful! I am Svetlana Mikhailovna. Elena, it's lovely to meet you." "Your Russian is excellent," Svetlana said approvingly. "Much better than the last American consultant who visited." He kept trying to discuss contracts in English, even with the workers. Elena caught Dmitri's slight wince at the mention of consultants. Alexei Morozov's influence, perhaps? The tour began in the workshop, where Elena found herself genuinely fascinated despite her professional interest. Skilled craftsmen restored mining equipment with the kind of attention to detail that came from decades of experience. She watched an elderly worker carefully rebuild a drill mechanism, his hands moving with practiced precision. "Viktor Petrovich has been with us for 30 years, Dmitri explained, his voice carrying genuine affection. "He started working for my father when I was still in university." "Your father built this company?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer from her research. "From nothing. He was a coal miner who saw better ways to maintain equipment. Started with repairs in our garage, then small improvements, then designing entirely new components." Dmitri's expression softened. He always said Russian miners deserve tools as reliable as the men who used them. Elena felt an unexpected pang of recognition. Her grandfather had said similar things about American miners, about the dignity of dangerous work and the responsibility of those who supplied the tools. "The accident that killed him," Dmitri continued quietly, "it was caused by faulty safety equipment. Equipment that should have been inspected more carefully, maintained better. That's why we focus on reliability over profit margins." The bitter edge returned to his voice, and Elena sensed depths of pain that went beyond simple grief. She wanted to offer comfort, to share her own experience of losing parents, but Elena Martinez wouldn't know about private planes crashing in Colorado snowstorms. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said instead, the inadequate words carrying genuine feeling. They moved through the facility methodically. Elena noted the skilled workforce, the quality of the refurbished equipment, the obvious pride the employees took in their work. She also noted the older machinery, the deferred maintenance on the building itself, the careful way conversations about new orders seemed to skirt around uncomfortable topics. In Dmitri's office, surrounded by technical manuals and family photographs, Elena found herself studying a picture of a younger Dmitri with an older man who shared his strong jaw and direct gaze. "Your father," she said, it wasn't a question. 3 years ago, a cave-in at the Krasnoyarsk mine, the safety inspector who approved that site's equipment received a promotion 6 months later. The words carried weight that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with injustice. "Alexei Morozov was involved in mine safety oversight then," Elena said carefully, connecting dots from her research. Dmitri's head snapped up. "How do you know that?" Elena cursed her slip. Elena Martinez shouldn't have that information readily available. "I researched mining safety regulations for a previous client. Morozov's name appeared in several reports. The explanation was weak, and Dmitri's suspicious expression showed he knew it. But before he could probe further, his phone rang. "Excuse me," he said, answering in rapid Russian. Elena pretended to study the technical diagrams on his wall while listening to the conversation. Financial pressures, delayed payments, promises of future contracts that sounded increasingly desperate. When Dmitri ended the call, his face was grim. "Problems?" she asked gently. "Always." He gestured at the financial reports scattered across his desk. "We do good work, but good work doesn't guarantee payment. Especially when certain consultants suggest that foreign companies might offer better terms than established local ones." Morozov again? "He's been very helpful in introducing American investors to Russian opportunities," Dmitri said with bitter irony. "Unfortunately, his advice usually involves recommending that foreign companies acquire existing operations rather than partnering with them." Elena's pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of intelligence she needed. Evidence of Morozov's methods, his pressure tactics, his role in destabilizing smaller companies. But hearing it from Dmitri, seeing the personal cost of these corporate games, made her feel complicit in something uglier than business. "What will you do?" she asked. "Survive. Adapt. Hope that integrity eventually matters more than connections." He met her eyes directly. "Though I'm beginning to wonder if that's naive optimism." Before Elena could respond, a knock on the office door interrupted them. Svetlana appeared with tea and concerned maternal energy. "Dmitri Sergeyevich, you haven't eaten today, and our guest must be hungry." "I should go," Elena said, suddenly desperate to escape the weight of Dmitri's trust and her own deception. "Wait." Dmitri stood, his expression showing internal struggle. Would you like to have dinner? Not business. Just, I'd like to hear more about your work in America." The invitation hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Elena knew she should decline, maintain professional distance, remember that she was here to evaluate his company for potential acquisition. But looking at this man who was fighting to preserve his father's legacy while surrounded by forces determined to destroy it, she found herself nodding. "I'd like that," she said, meaning it more than she should. As she left the facility, Elena carried with her the image of skilled craftsmen doing honest work, of a man trying to honor his father's memory, and of a company that represented everything she claimed to value in business: integrity, quality, human dignity. The problem was that everything she'd learned made Volkov mining equipment exactly the kind of acquisition target Castellanos mining needed. And that realization made her feel like she was already betraying the trust she saw in Dmitri's eyes. The address Dmitri had given Elena led to a modest apartment building in one of Moscow's older residential districts. Soviet-era architecture softened by decades of human habitation. Flower boxes and windows, children's bicycles chained to railings, the kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors' names. Elena climbed 3 flights of stairs, her heart beating faster with each step. This wasn't a business dinner at a restaurant where she could maintain professional distance. This was personal territory, family space, the kind of invitation that carried weight in Russian culture. Dmitri opened the door before she could knock, as if he'd been listening for her footsteps. He'd changed into a sweater that made him look younger, less guarded, though uncertainty flickered in his dark eyes. "Elena? Thank you for coming." He stepped aside to let her enter. "I should warn you. My grandmother has been cooking all afternoon. She's excited to meet an American." The apartment was small but warm, filled with the kind of accumulated comfort that came from generations of family life. Hand-crocheted doilies, black and white photographs in mismatched frames, the lingering scent of something wonderful simmering on the stove. "Babushka," Dmitri called in Russian. "Our guest is here." The woman who emerged from the kitchen was smaller than Elena had expected, but her presence filled the room. Babushka Volkov had the kind of face that had seen everything and judged most of it with amused tolerance. Her eyes, sharp as winter air, studied Elena with frank curiosity. "So," she said in accented but confident English, "you are the American translator who knows about mining." "Yes, ma'am. Elena Martinez. Thank you for inviting me to your home." Martinez is Spanish name, yes? But you look Russian. High cheekbones, strong jaw, good genes. Babushka nodded approvingly. Come, sit. Dinner is almost ready. The dining table had been set with obvious care. Good china that didn't quite match. Silverware polished to a shine. Cloth napkins pressed into precise folds. Elena recognized the effort behind the presentation, the desire to honor a guest with the best the household could offer. Tell me about your family, Babushka said as she served borscht in bowls that had clearly been someone's wedding china decades ago. Parents? Brothers? Sisters? Elena's chest tightened. My parents died when I was young. I have a brother in Colorado. Ah. Babushka's expression softened with understanding. Orphans recognize each other, I think. I lost my parents in the war. Dmitri lost his father too young. We understand what it means to build family from what remains. The conversation flowed between English and Russian as the evening progressed. Babushka shared stories of wartime Moscow, of raising children during Soviet shortages, of watching her son build a business from nothing, and her grandson struggle to preserve it. Elena found herself sharing carefully edited memories of Colorado, of learning to ride horses on her grandfather's ranch, of the silence that came with mountain winters. You cook? Babushka asked as Elena helped clear the soup bowls. Some. Basic things. Basic is good. Fancy is for restaurants. Come, I show you real Russian cooking. In the kitchen, Elena found herself learning to prepare pelmeni under Babushka's watchful supervision. The older woman's hands, weathered by decades of work, demonstrated the precise folding technique while sharing family secrets. My grandmother taught me this recipe during the blockade, Babushka said quietly. We had no meat then, but the technique survives everything. Elena's phone buzzed, Victor's ringtone. She glanced at the screen, then at Babushka, who was watching with knowing eyes. Your brother? The older woman asked. Yes. He worries when I travel. Answer. Family should not worry. Elena stepped into the hallway, keeping her voice low. Victor, I can't talk long. I'm at dinner with potential business contacts. Elena, I've been reviewing the financial reports you sent. Some of these Russian companies are in worse shape than we thought. Are you sure this expansion is worth the risk? Through the kitchen doorway, Elena could see Dmitri helping his grandmother prepare the main course. Their easy familiarity, speaking of countless shared meals. Of love expressed through daily care. I'm still gathering information, she said. I need more time to evaluate the full situation. Just be careful, and remember why you're there. This is business, not charity work. After ending the call, Elena returned to find Babushka studying one of the pelmeni Elena had attempted to fold. Your brother gives good advice? The older woman asked. Usually, he thinks I take too many risks. Risks are necessary, but knowing which risks are worth taking. Babushka's eyes held depths Elena couldn't fathom. That requires wisdom. Over dinner, beef stroganoff that made Elena understand why Russian cuisine had survived centuries of hardship, the conversation turned to business. Dmitri spoke with quiet passion about his plans for the company, his dreams of modernizing while preserving his father's values. Americans always want to know about profit margins, he said, echoing his earlier criticism. But profit without purpose is just greed. What's your purpose? Elena asked. To honor the men who risk their lives underground. To build equipment that brings them home safely. To prove that Russian craftsmanship can compete with anyone in the world. His voice carried conviction that made Elena's chest ache. As the evening wound down, Babushka pressed a handwritten recipe card into Elena's hands. For borscht. Real recipe, not restaurant version. Thank you. This has been wonderful. You come back, Babushka said firmly. Dmitri needs friends who understand what matters. Walking Elena to the door, Dmitri seemed reluctant to let the evening end. I hope I didn't bore you with family dinner, he said awkwardly. Not at all. Your grandmother is remarkable. She likes you. That's not common with Americans. He paused, studying Elena's face in the dim hallway light. "You're not what I expected when we first met." "What did you expect?" "Someone temporary. Someone just passing through looking for profit." His voice dropped. "But you listened tonight. Really listened." "That's rare." Elena felt the weight of his trust like a physical pressure against her chest. This good man, this struggling family, this honest business, they deserved better than her deception. "Dmitri," she began, then stopped. What could she say? That she was exactly the kind of American investor he feared? That she'd spent the evening evaluating his family's vulnerabilities while accepting their hospitality? Yes. "Thank you for letting me see the real Moscow, not the business version." He smiled, and for a moment the guardedness disappeared entirely. "Perhaps tomorrow I can show you more, if you're interested." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. As she descended the stairs, Babushka's recipe card clutched in her hand. She realized she was falling for more than just Dmitri Volkov. She was falling for the life he represented, the possibility of belonging somewhere, of being valued for who she was rather than what she owned. The problem was that Elena Martinez could never have that life. And Elena Castellanos was about to destroy it. The Ritz-Carlton's opulent lobby felt like stepping into another world after the warmth of Dmitri's family dinner. Elena checked her watch. Barely 24 hours since she'd left Babushka Volkov's kitchen with flowers still dusting her sleeves and genuine affection warming her chest. Now she sat across from Alexei Morozov in the hotel's marble and gold restaurant, watching him dissect his caviar with surgical precision, while discussing the systematic dismantling of Russian mining companies. "The Americans are quite aggressive in their acquisition strategies," Morozov said, his English carrying the polish of international business schools. "They prefer clean purchases, no messy partnerships, no emotional attachments to legacy companies." Elena's coffee grew cold as she listened to him describe exactly the kind of corporate strategy she'd been sent to Moscow to implement. "You work with many American companies? Those serious about Russian expansion, yes. I facilitate introductions, smooth regulatory difficulties, ensure proper valuations." His smile was practiced. "For instance, Volkov Mining Equipment, charming family operation, but undercapitalized and vulnerable. Perfect acquisition target for the right American investor." The casual way he discussed Dmitri's company as prey made Elena's stomach clench. "They seem to do quality work." "Quality, yes. Profitability, questionable. Sentiment is expensive in modern business, Ms. Martinez." Morozov leaned forward. "Your translation clients, they would appreciate honest assessments of Russian opportunities?" Before Elena could answer, a familiar voice cut through the restaurant's murmur. "Elena? What the hell are you doing here?" James Mitchell stood beside their table in his perfectly tailored suit, his expression shifting from surprise to suspicion as he took in the scene. Elena's blood turned to ice water. "James," she managed, her mind racing. "What brings you to Moscow?" "Castellanos mining business. Client confidentiality, you understand?" His eyes narrowed as they moved between Elena and Morozov. "Though I'm curious about your translation work suddenly extending to five-star hotel meetings." Morozov watched this exchange with predatory interest. "Mr. Mitchell, is it? Another American businessman? How fortuitous." Elena felt the walls closing in. James knew her real identity. Morozov was clearly more connected than she'd realized. And somewhere across the city, Dmitri was probably helping his grandmother clean dinner dishes, trusting that the American translator who'd shared their table was exactly who she claimed to be. "Actually," Elena said, standing abruptly, "I should go. Early morning tomorrow." But as she gathered her purse, she caught the look that passed between James and Morozov, a flicker of recognition that suggested this meeting wasn't nearly as coincidental as it appeared. Her carefully constructed deception was beginning to unravel, and she had no idea who was pulling the threads. The train to the Ural Mountains swayed rhythmically through the Russian countryside, past forests that stretched to the horizon like an endless green sea. Elena pressed her face to the window, watching small villages flash by while trying to calm the anxiety that had been building since her encounter with James and Morozov. Dmitri sat across from her, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. Away from Moscow's pressures, he seemed younger, more open. His hands gestured expressively as he pointed out landmarks. A monastery perched on a distant hill, a river that had powered mills for centuries, the gradually rising peaks that marked the edge of Siberia. "My father brought me here when I was 12, he said as the train began its climb into the mountains. Said every Russian should see where our strength comes from. Not just the minerals, the endurance. Is that why you stayed in the mining business? Family tradition?" Dmitri's expression grew thoughtful. "Partly, but also because someone needs to remember what mining used to mean, before corporations and consultants turned it into spreadsheet calculations." Elena felt the familiar stab of guilt. She was exactly the kind of corporate calculator he despised, disguised as someone who might understand his values. The abandoned mine sat in a valley carved by generations of extraction, its wooden structures weathered to silver gray. Dmitri led her through the remains with the reverence of someone visiting a cathedral. "This is where my father learned his trade," he said, stopping beside the entrance to a sealed shaft. "Copper mine, operated for 80 years before the ore played out." Elena studied the site with professional eyes, noting the signs of proper closure procedures, the environmental restoration efforts, the careful way the dangerous areas had been secured. But Dmitri's voice drew her attention back to the human story. He was 19 when he started here, worked 12-hour shifts, sent most of his pay home to support his mother and sisters. Said the mine taught him respect for the earth, for the men beside him, for the danger that waited in every dark tunnel. "You sound like you admired him." "I did. He was everything I'm trying to be. Honest, reliable, someone you could trust in a crisis." Dmitri picked up a piece of copper ore, turning it over in his calloused hands. "When he died in that cave-in, I realized how rare those qualities are becoming." Elena wanted to comfort him, to share her own grief about losing parents too young. Instead, she found herself stepping closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. "The safety equipment that failed," she said carefully. "You mentioned it should have been inspected better." Dmitri's jaw tightened. The inspection was a formality. Signatures on papers, bribes to officials, whatever kept the mine operational and profitable. "My father and 3 other men paid the price for someone else's negligence." "Morozov's negligence?" The question slipped out before Elena could stop it. Dmitri turned to stare at her, suspicion flickering in his dark eyes. "How do you know that name keeps coming up in conversations about my father's death?" Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd pushed too hard, revealed too much knowledge. You mentioned him before. And yesterday, when we discussed mine safety regulations." "Elena." Dmitri stepped closer, his voice gentle but probing. "Who are you, really? And don't tell me you're just a translator. Translators don't ask the kinds of questions you ask." The mountain air felt thin in Elena's lungs. This was the moment she'd been dreading, when her carefully constructed lies collided with genuine feelings, when the choice between mission and heart became unavoidable. "I'm someone who cares about justice," she said finally. "Someone who thinks your father deserved better." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true. And as Dmitri searched her face for deception, Elena realized that for the first time since arriving in Moscow, she was speaking from her heart rather than her cover story. "I think," Dmitri said quietly, "that I'm falling in love with a woman I don't really know." The words hung between them in the mountain silence, honest and terrifying in their simplicity. Elena felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at this good man who trusted her enough to share his deepest vulnerabilities while she hid behind lies that grew more painful with each passing day. She should tell him the truth. She should explain about Castellanos mining, about her real reason for being in Russia, about the wealth and power that made genuine relationships nearly impossible. But as she opened her mouth to confess, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Victor. "James says you're compromised. Extract immediately." The moment shattered like glass against stone, leaving Elena trapped between 2 worlds with no safe path forward. The business reception at the Metropole Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and dangerous ambitions. Elena moved through the crowd in her carefully chosen black dress, playing the role of Elena Martinez, while her mind raced with contingency plans. Victor's message had been clear. Her cover was blown, James suspected her mission, and Moscow was no longer safe. But she couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without warning Dmitri about what was coming. Ms. Martinez. Alexei Morozov appeared beside her with predatory smoothness, champagne flute in hand, and triumph in his eyes. How lovely to see you again. I believe we have much to discuss. Elena's blood chilled. Mr. Morozov, enjoying the reception? Immensely, particularly the unexpected guests. He gestured across the room where James Mitchell stood in conversation with several Russian officials, his Harvard-trained charm working its calculated magic. Your colleague Mr. Mitchell has been most informative about American mining interests. Has he? Morozov's smile widened. Indeed. We've discussed several fascinating topics, including the remarkable coincidence of Elena Martinez appearing in Moscow at precisely the moment Castellanos Mining begins evaluating Russian acquisitions. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Elena fought to keep her expression neutral, while her mind scrambled for escape routes. I'm afraid I don't understand. Of course you don't. Morozov stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. Elena Castellanos, heir to one of America's largest mining operations, traveling under false documents to conduct corporate espionage. Quite a story, wouldn't you agree? Elena's hands trembled slightly as she set down her champagne. That's quite an imagination you have. Is it? Perhaps we should ask your friend Mr. Volkov what he thinks. I'm sure he'd be fascinated to learn that the modest translator he's been courting actually owns more gold mines than he could dream of. The threat was crystal clear. Elena's eyes found Dmitri across the room, deep in conversation with potential clients, his face animated with passion for his work. He had no idea that the woman he was falling for was the embodiment of everything he feared about American corporate predators. What do you want? Elena asked quietly. Cooperation. Castellanos Mining will acquire Volkov mining equipment through my facilitation, at terms I determine. In exchange, Mr. Volkov never learns about your deception. He keeps his romantic illusions, you get your acquisition, and I profit handsomely from the arrangement. And if I refuse? Morozov's expression turned cold. Then I'm afraid your new romance will suffer a rather dramatic revelation. Russian men don't take kindly to being manipulated by wealthy American women. The humiliation alone might destroy him. Elena felt trapped between impossible choices. Accept Morozov's blackmail and betray everything Dmitri had built, or let him learn the truth from the worst possible source at the worst possible moment. I need time to consider, she said. Of course. 24 hours should be sufficient. Morozov straightened his tie with casual menace. Do give my regards to Mr. Volkov. Such a shame when family businesses become unprofitable. As Morozov melted back into the crowd, Elena stood frozen in the center of Moscow's elite, surrounded by laughter and conversation while her carefully constructed world collapsed around her. Across the room, Dmitri caught her eye and smiled, the trusting expression of a man who believed she was exactly who she claimed to be. Elena smiled back, her heart breaking with the knowledge that by tomorrow night, that trust would be destroyed forever. The Moscow Records Office closed its heavy doors behind Elena and Katya at precisely midnight, their shadows stretching long across the empty street. Elena's hands shook as she clutched the manila folder containing 20 years of mine safety violations, each document a piece of evidence linking Alexei Morozov to systematic corruption that had cost lives, including Dmitri's father. This is enough to destroy him, Katya whispered, her former intelligence training evident in how she'd navigated the building's security systems. But using it will expose your real identity. Corporate resources, American legal connections. Elena Martinez couldn't access this information. Elena stared at the documents that could bring justice for Dmitri's father, while simultaneously revealing her as the wealthy American heiress she'd been pretending not to be. I know. They drove through empty streets toward Dmitri's apartment, where Elena had promised to explain everything. But as they rounded the corner to his building, she saw him waiting on the steps, his expression grim in the lamplight. "Elena." His voice carried a weight that made her stomach clench. "We need to talk." Inside his apartment, the warmth from their family dinner felt like a memory from another lifetime. Dmitri stood by the window, his back rigid with tension. "I know who you are," he said without turning around. "Elena Castellanos. Mining heiress. Billionaire. Everything I should have suspected from the moment you started asking questions no translator would know to ask." Elena's carefully rehearsed explanations died in her throat. "Dmitri, You've been lying to me from the beginning." He turned, and the betrayal in his dark eyes was worse than any anger. "Playing the modest translator while secretly evaluating my company for acquisition. Was any of it real? The dinner with Babushka? The conversation at the mine? The way you looked at me when I talked about my father? The feelings were real," Elena said desperately. "Everything else was complicated. But what I felt for you was built on lies." Dmitri's voice broke slightly. "You let me share my family's struggles, our financial problems, our vulnerabilities, all while planning to buy us out and destroy everything my father built." Elena held up the folder. "I found evidence about your father's death." Morozov was... "I don't want your evidence." The words exploded from him. "I want the truth. I want to know if the woman I fell in love with even exists, or if she was just another American corporate strategy." The question hung between them like a chasm Elena didn't know how to cross. Outside, Moscow's winter wind rattled the windows, and Elena realized that some deceptions, no matter how well-intentioned, left wounds too deep for explanations to heal. The private conference room at the Metropole Hotel felt like a stage set for corporate warfare. Alexei Morozov sat at the head of the polished table, flanked by lawyers and documents that would transfer control of Volkov mining equipment to his shell companies. Dmitri occupied the opposite end, his face carved from stone, while Elena stood by the window overlooking Red Square. "Excellent," Morozov purred, spreading contracts across the mahogany surface. "Mr. Volkov has agreed to sell his company's assets to settle his outstanding debts. Ms. Martinez will facilitate the translation of terms for her American clients." Elena watched Dmitri's reflection in the window glass. 24 hours had passed since their confrontation, and he'd barely looked at her. The man who'd shared his family's dinner table now treated her like a stranger, which, she realized, was exactly what she was to him. "The purchase price is quite generous," Morozov continued, his tone suggesting anything but generosity. "Considering the company's recent difficulties meeting its obligations." Dmitri's jaw tightened. "Sign the papers, Elena. Finish what you came here to do." The defeat in his voice was worse than anger. Elena turned from the window, her decision crystallizing like ice in her chest. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying the authority she'd hidden for weeks, "there's something you should all know." Morozov's pen paused mid-signature. "Ms. Martinez, please. This is a simple business transaction. Nothing about this is simple." Elena walked to the table, placing her real passport, Elena Castellanos, not Martinez, in front of Dmitri. "And I'm not a translator." The silence stretched like a held breath. Dmitri stared at the passport, then at her face, while understanding dawned in his dark eyes. "I own Castellanos Mining," Elena continued, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "The third largest gold mining operation in North America. I came to Russia under false identity to evaluate acquisition targets." Morozov's face had gone ashen. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Elena pulled out her phone, speed dialing a number she knew by heart. "Victor, conference call. Authorization code 77 Alpha. Transfer $50 million to Volkov mining equipment immediately." "Elena, what the hell? Do it. Now." She ended the call and looked directly at Dmitri. "Consider it a partnership investment, not an acquisition. Your company remains independent." Dmitri's expression cycled through shock, confusion, and something that might have been hope. "You're serious? About the money?" "Yes." "About everything else?" Elena's voice broke slightly. I spent weeks lying to you about who I was, but I never lied about how I felt. Morozov stood abruptly, his composure cracking. This is highly irregular. There are contracts, agreements, based on fraudulent information you provided about Mr. Volkov's debt situation. Elena opened the manila folder Katya had helped her obtain. 20 years of safety violations you covered up, bribes you accepted, mine inspections you falsified. She spread the documents across the table like accusations, including the Krasnoyarsk mine, where Dmitri's father died. The room went dead silent. Dmitri leaned forward, his hands trembling as he read the evidence that connected Morozov to the corruption that had killed his father. You knew, Dmitri whispered. You knew he was responsible. Morozov's mask finally slipped entirely. You have no idea what you're interfering with, Ms. Castellanos. There are forces at work here beyond your American corporate understanding. Then explain it to the Russian authorities. Elena pulled out her phone again. I'm sure they'll be fascinated by your forces. As security guards appeared in the doorway, summoned by Elena's earlier arrangements, Morozov's face twisted with rage and desperation. This won't end here, he snarled as the guards moved toward him. You think money solves everything? You've destroyed more than you know. But Elena was no longer listening to his threats. Her attention was fixed on Dmitri, who sat staring at the evidence of his father's murder with tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry it took so long to find the truth. I'm sorry your father paid the price for someone else's greed. Dmitri looked up at her with eyes that held pain, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite identify. The woman I fell in love with, he said quietly, was she real? Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She was real. She just owned more gold mines than she knew how to explain. For the first time in days, the ghost of a smile crossed Dmitri's face. Gold digger, he said softly. I called you a gold digger. The irony wasn't lost on me. Outside, Moscow's winter evening painted the sky in shades of redemption and possibility. Elena had revealed her truth, exposed the corruption that had destroyed Dmitri's family, and offered her wealth without strings attached. Now all that remained was to discover whether love built on deception could survive the harsh light of honesty. 3 months later, Elena stood in the Colorado snow outside her family's ranch house, watching Victor pace the front porch with characteristic anxiety. You're sure about this? Her brother asked for the 10th time that morning. Moving the company's regional headquarters to Moscow? Living half the year in Russia? Elena, you barely know this man. Elena smiled, adjusting her engagement ring, a simple band Dmitri had crafted himself from gold mined in the Urals. I know he makes me laugh. I know he sees me as Elena, not Castellanos mining. And I know his grandmother already considers me family. A car pulled up the snowy drive, and Elena's heart lifted as Dmitri emerged, looking overwhelmed by the vast Colorado landscape. Babushka Volkov followed, bundled in furs and muttering appreciative Russian about American mountains. Victor Castellanos, Elena said as the introductions began. Meet my fiancé, Dmitri Volkov, and his grandmother. Victor's handshake was cautious, but genuine. Welcome to Colorado. Elena tells me you're expanding into North American markets? Partnership, Dmitri corrected, his arm sliding around Elena's waist. Equal partners. In business and everything else. Babushka Volkov studied the ranch with knowing eyes. Good place for grandchildren, she announced in English. Strong mountains. Strong family. Elena laughed, feeling the last weight of deception lift from her shoulders. She'd found something more valuable than gold. Someone who loved Elena the person, not Elena the fortune. As they walked toward the house where 3 generations of Castellanos' dreams had been born, Elena realized she'd finally struck the richest vein of all. Authentic love built on truth instead of careful lies. Come on, she said to Dmitri, squeezing his hand. Let me show you where I really grew up. Behind them, Moscow and its corporate intrigues felt like memories from someone else's life. Ahead lay the possibility of building something genuine together, a love as enduring as the mountains that surrounded them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.